Hello YouTube, this is an Ace Special, and today I'm going to talk about video game graphics. Now, the game you see before you is a game called Scourge of War Gettysburg. This is the 150th anniversary edition, I believe. And this edition of this game came out in 2013, of course. The original Scourge of War Gettysburg, I should mention, came out in 2010. Now, you may notice that the game, graphically speaking, doesn't look at all impressive. I mean, what you literally have here are the character models look like they're FMVs. Now, for those who don't know, because they weren't around in the mid-90s, the early mid-90s, FMV games were games where to get the graphics, what they did was they took actual live-action actors and recorded them moving around, and that would be the animations for the game. And as you can see, that's a lot of what it looks like here. And this isn't a trick of having the game on low settings. This is about as high settings as you can get for this game, to be honest. So, what do I think of this game? Well, it's actually pretty good. There's a lot of good elements to it. I mean, it's pretty well thought out, and I do like this game. And that is actually going to set the tone for this video, to be honest, though, regarding my opinion on video game graphics and how much they matter. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are those out there that do make the claim that video game graphics matter a big deal. And to be honest, they used to matter more than they do now, in my opinion. There's a few reasons why for this. First of all, we are at the point now where the graphics themselves, they have indeed gotten better since the last generation, but the changes aren't quite as noticeable as they were from the changes of, say, the PlayStation 2 and Xbox era to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era. And indeed, if you look at, say, the 90s, for example, on how big the size of the games got from 1990 to just 1995, some of them, it was absolutely incredible. But so the changes graphically were enormous back then. And not only that, but the changes also tended to affect gameplay at that point. This would go on into the mid-2000s at the very least, where graphics would affect gameplay, and that's where that's one of the reasons why they were more important back then than they are now. Nowadays, the graphics don't really improve gameplay. In fact, sometimes it actually makes it a little bit harder to play the game because you have dust and smoke obscuring your view or something like that in a first-person shooter game. But that's really nothing to complain about because, well, that's what it's supposed to do. So that being said, let's talk a bit more about this, though. Think of it this way. If you want to look at, because a lot of people will try to defend the way that graphics are being done by saying that, well, they're a big deal and all that, yeah. Well, here's the thing. If you look at how many games there are that were known for their graphics, you will notice that there's not that many games that were strictly known for good graphics alone that people speak of a lot more anymore. Case in point, look at Crysis. Crysis used to be one of the big games when it came to graphics. But you'll note nowadays that, well, not that many people still talk about Crysis. I mean, the thing is, the graphics have improved so much that Crysis doesn't look that impressive anymore. It's still not bad looking, I guess, for its age, but you see my point. On the other hand, if you want to talk about a game that's known for gameplay over graphics, have a look at something like, say, Mount & Blade. Mount & Blade was a game that came out, I believe, in 2008, 2009, something like that. And you'll notice that when magazines like PC Gamer have a look at some of their top 100 PC games of all time, Mount & Blade will often be on that list. Or at least Mount & Blade Warband, the re-release of it. And the thing is, it's not a very good-looking game at all. I mean, it runs on Macs at DirectX 9. Which was in use in the early 2000s, and you have an option for running DirectX 7. So there you go. The graphics are just, they look like they're early 2000s, alright, or maybe late 90s even. But the gameplay is just so fantastic that it doesn't really matter. I mean, so the fact that the gameplay itself was completely able to redeem the game ultimately means that it's good enough that people still talk about it. There's still releases made using this game engine. In fact, two of them came out not too long ago, Viking Conquest and Caribbean were both built using the same engine that powered Mount & Blade Warband. They look about the same. So there you go. Now, on the other hand, if you look at another game that has had fantastic graphics, but has received a lot of flack, would be The Order 8. Would be that new game for PlayStation, The Order. Now, The Order, I believe 1886 is, I believe, the name of the title, came out. It's a, from what I understand, it's a 5-hour single-player only experience, and while the graphics themselves are extremely impressive, what you've got is a whole lot of nothing but, well, the gameplay consists of 3 things. It consists of cutscenes, it consists of a lot of walking around from point A to point B to explain the story, and then it consists of, well, fairly standard third-person shooter mechanics, from what I've heard. So it's not really that... It's not really good at all when it comes down to it. And again, this is from what I've heard. I haven't actually played the game myself, but this is coming from a lot of people who have. Anyways, but moving on. So there is quite a bit of an argument there for saying that graphics don't really save a game on their own. Now, when I talk about graphics, though, I do have to make a few. I do have to point out a few things on opinion-wise. Well, first of all, let's talk about some controversies here. I think it's cooled down enough that I can talk about the Watch Dogs controversy and my opinion on it. For those of you who don't know, when Watch Dogs was released, it was released in the graphics that it had at E3 a year before the game came out were actually notably better than the final product. Now, let me reiterate that for you. E3 is supposed to be, when you present a game at E3, it's supposed to be an unfinished product. It's not supposed to look better than your final game. And yet, unfortunately, that is exactly what we got. And until you realize that the PC gamers can actually hack the game, or modify the game, or whatever you want to call it in this case, because it's very easy to do. To get the best settings on their own by just changing some of the settings files. I mean, it's not that difficult at all. In fact, I've done more complex things, or have been inspired to do more complex things with Battlefield 2 by adding more players in the single-player AI mode. But that's another subject. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that apparently Ubisoft decided to actually get rid of the highest settings on PC, and on consoles the game looks notably worse. But the thing was, you had people saying that the gameplay was fantastic itself, but they were condemning the game ultimately by trying to say that the graphics themselves were, well, they said that the Xbox One looked like an Xbox 360 game, they said the Xbox 360 game looked like an original Xbox game, and all that. But here's my opinion on it for those of you who are curious. I would say that the graphics themselves are not inherently the problem, or not the major problem. It's the way that Ubisoft mishandled things that's the problem. The fact that they actually hid the max settings, the fact that the E3 trailer looks better than the base game, and some of the shady practices that they simply did with this is what mattered regarding Watch Dogs. The graphics themselves, I didn't really care much about the graphics, because, to be fair, if the game itself is fantastic, there's no reason to condemn it, even if the graphics themselves aren't really that good. Now, that's one thing. There is another flip side of this, though, HD re-releases. And what's my opinion on those? Well, I do actually kind of like HD re-releases. That's one caveat where I can promote easily. But it's not because I expect the graphics to be top of the line. It's because it's an acknowledgement that an old game can still carry itself and still be successful in this very day and age. It's also, to an extent, preserving a classic title by making it run on a more modern operating system, or fixing it so that it runs on a more modern operating system. And in addition to that, it also allows for bug fixes and things like that in general. Now, yes, the graphics are very nice. In fact, I do like the idea of putting HD on a lot of things. But you'll note, with a lot of the HD re-releases, that the graphics themselves get some moderate upgrades and not that much else. If you look at, and it's even more notable when you think of mods, like, say, the HD mod for Thief 2. But the thing is, I still support these things openly. I still love the idea of HD re-releases because of, well, what they stand for in a lot of cases. And it might generate interest in some of the old genres that have otherwise fallen by the wayside, might generate it enough to get them back into place. For them to actually, I mean, case in point, you had old FMV games like, well, let's think here, good FMV games here. Tex Murphy. There you go, Tex Murphy. And they had a re-release of Tex Murphy. Now, I'm not sure if the re-release is a genuine FMV or not, but the fact of the matter is that there was a new Tex Murphy game that came out, which was rather surprising. And to be honest, I actually liked some of the Tex Murphy games from back in the day, like Under a Killing Moon, for example. It was actually a pretty good game there. Some interesting humor. I loved the fact that they basically had Darth Vader as God, or the actor that played him, anyways, as God. So there you go. But anyways, graphics, well, how much do graphics actually matter when it comes to a game, score-wise? And I would say that I don't usually put scores on games. I mean, if you've seen my channel before, you know that I do not typically score games. But if you needed to put a score on a game and needed to factor in just how much graphics actually mattered to that game's score, I would give you 10%, okay? 10% of the game's entire score should matter on graphics and sound. Let me be clear about that, and sound included. And sound can actually, a lot of times, be more important than graphics. Thief 2 might have had subpar graphics when it came out, but the sound design was absolutely fantastic. In fact, it's still pretty good. Now, granted, it's not... It's good. It's designed well, although the recordings themselves, well, it could, I guess, use a little bit of a touch-up when it comes to sound, but it's still pretty good. And it's still a joy to listen to in the modern, even nowadays, if you play Thief 2. Like I said, though, the graphics, well, they weren't that fantastic back in the day, and nowadays the age of the game is really starting to show. But there are games out there that still manage to age well as well, I should mention. The original Cossacks game aged fantastically well because of how colorful and bright the graphics are. Which is so anyways, but that's pretty much my opinion on graphics. There's some good to be had with the graphics, there's some bad to be had with it, but the thing is, the important thing is that we are focusing a little bit too much on them, I would say, because a lot of times the industry is just putting too much money into the graphics, and as a result of it, it's getting to the point that they're actually having to cut a lot of elements out of the games. You'll note that a lot of the games with single player tend to have much more linear single player experiences these days, rather than the open level design of what games used to have. You'll note that DLC is getting ever and ever more rampant. And it's because the fact that the games are costing so much to make that they actually have stopped trying to factor them as a $60 game and are trying to find ways to make them into $120 games, and that's with the use of DLC. And then, of course, you're also seeing examples of games like The Order 1886, naturally, where it's just so pared down because they focus so much on the graphics that everything else suffered for it. And that's the real thing. The games themselves do need to have more about. They do need to focus more about gameplay and less on graphics. I mean, I would be more than happy to see a game that sacrificed a little bit in the graphics department, like the Scourge of War series right here, if it meant that it had better gameplay. And really, that's just something that the AAA industry isn't really got. So yeah, that's my opinion on the whole idea of graphics and just how much they matter. Hope you guys found this interesting. I will hopefully see you guys again soon. Ace out.